Hi everyone, thank you for joining us again this month. For this month, our book review for the month of August is The Case for Faith by Strobel. And in this book, the author lays out convincing set of arguments that Christianity is worthy of belief and acceptance, in spite of accusations from its popular enemies. The author did mention, which we would learn today, would learn from a study, would learn the most common objections to Christianity, how Christians should respond to these criticisms, and common ways people misrepresent the biblical teaching. So, on the road to answers to the challenge of faith, the author outlined 8 objections, and today we'll learn together from the first 4. Objection 1, which is chapter 1, it says, since evil and suffering exist, a loving God cannot. So, since evil and suffering exist, a loving God cannot. So, it has been recognized in the church by theologians and anyone who thinks deeply that the problem of evil is one of the greatest challenge that face the Christian and the a religious person in general. So we will be reviewing from Holy Reads. The problem of evil can be summarized in fairly simple terms, which we encounter every day of our lives. So, few simple terms. Number 1, it says that if God is supremely good, which the author mentioned, it says, if God is supremely good and supremely powerful, then he would not want evil and suffering to exist in the world. So that is some arguments by some people. 2, God being supremely powerful could make a world without suffering, or God could act in a world with suffering to immediately end that suffering. 3, pain and suffering in the world. So, if there is pain and suffering in the world, therefore a God who is supremely good and supremely powerful does not exist. These are like arguments from people, and these are powerful arguments. However, the author wants us to understand that we can and should respond to this line of reasoning in a number of ways. When we hear these things, when we hear these arguments from people, first, we know that good human beings will allow bad things to exist temporarily to derive a greater good. When we exercise or discipline a child, for example, we allow or cause a bad thing to happen because we know that we can expect greater good than we could get by avoiding the associated pain and suffering. The author used the example of when one of his daughter was trying to try the needle, and the needle injured her, and she still kept on trying despite the pain. I mean, as a loving father, he would have run to meet her and said, okay, let me do it for you. But he didn't. He stayed back and watched to see how the daughter would thread the needle, and immediately she got it. She was so excited that she did that herself, and she came running, and the father came out, and she came running to the dad and like, oh dad, see what I've done. So sometimes we allow that pain for greater good. And so likewise, if God is all powerful, God may have long-term goals in mind that we cannot foresee as humans. So he may allow kinds or degrees of suffering that we would never admit, because he sees the whole field. He has the bigger perspective of history before him. So in fact, evil can even function as evidence for God. If there is no God, then the whole universe and our lives are random chance. So we have no objective morality or standard to complain about, nor anyone to complain to. Pain can be a function or a megaphone to get people to turn to God, according to C.S. Lewis. God cares about our pain and wants to solve it in the long run. So we should be patient, but he can allow it to exist now to serve his greater purpose in our life. So the second objection is, since miracle contradicts science, they cannot be true. So people believe that since miracle contradicts science, they cannot be true. Miracles seem to be present in a present a problem. Sorry, miracle seems to present a problem for the Christian faith. And however, however, does this mean that miracles are unbelievable by intelligent people and are only stories for children? And as science disproved miracles? These are questions people would usually ask. According to the author, we should notice that miracles aren't as absurd of a proposition once you believe in God. So if you believe in God who created the heavens and the earth, it isn't more unbelievable to think that God could, at certain times and for his purposes, interact with the heavens and the earth in somewhat unexpected way. So in as much as we believe in God, we should also know that he can do this, he can, do the unexpected. So a miracle is an event not produced by natural causes, according to the author. It is an effect in the universe that is produced by external circumstances or causes, and is not intrinsic to the universe. So miracle do not contradict science, as some people would think, because science deals with events occurring in the natural world. So they are two different things. And also, so miracles have causes outside of nature, and science it deals only with nature. These are the ways we can answer these questions. Miracles have causes outside of nature, and science deals only with nature. We have reasons to believe a miracle occurred, then if we have solid testimony to effect that cannot be explained by appealing to science or the natural world. So for instance, we might read the testimonies of Jesus performing miracles in the gospel and assume that they couldn't have occurred because science has disproved the miracles. But if we see now that miracles are not disproved by science, then we have created an opportunity for believing in miracles. So now that we understand that the science has not disproved miracles, science only deals with nature, we can now tell others and anyone who asks us that, okay, I believe in miracle, I have the opportunity to believe in miracle because they were actually eyewitness that confirmed all the miracles Jesus did, the resurrection of Jesus as well, and the great miracle in itself. So these are ways that we can answer such arguments. So objection 3 says evolution explains life, so God isn't needed. Some people believe that evolution explains life from a theory called Darwin's theory. They believe that once upon a time, we didn't know how the world came to be. So ancient people thought that God created the universe and set up life. So, but then this man named Darwin came along and he showed that life could evolve by itself, and he explained how. However, but is this accurate? Does the fact that the organisms involved necessarily mean that God was not involved or God does not exist? So, to be clear, we need to, if we hear this kind of argument, we need to make people realize that anyone who comes up with this argument, that there are various problems with the ground scale of evolution, the theory of evolution, according to the author. It assumes, for one, that chemicals could organize themselves into life. However, the potential problem with that is the concept known as irreducible complexity, because even the simplest cell is too detailed, it's not simple at all. The structure is highly complex, so it cannot be explained by human reasoning. So it is far beyond our imagination, definitely. So we need to let people that argue this way to and let them know that it is far beyond human reasoning. It is far beyond comprehension. So whenever you see there is a creator, there's someone that created it. So we need to um explain this argument in this way, to say that there's so much to life. There is so much to every cell. So there is God, there is a mighty one behind that, and that is how we can explain this to anyone who argues in this way and needs an answer. Objection 4 says God isn't worthy of worship if he kills innocent children. So some people believe that because of the Old Testament, God is not worthy of worship. So if we, according to the author, if we turn through the Old Testament, which is one of our primary testimonies about the character of God, we may be surprised by the content. We find a God in scripture who commits violence against people. By some accounts, the God of the Old Testament is incredibly prejudiced, motivated by violence, and a bad example of divinity. But is this true? That's the question. What do we do with the violence God? This assumption or argument by people to say because of the Old Testament, oh, God is violent, is not a good God, is not a good father. Is this really true? There is also the violence of other people in the Bible, and we need to be careful not to attribute their actions, people's action in the Old Testament, to God. It is important to know that sometimes the Bible will make note of someone's action without approving of them. There are times when King David, for example, and other heroes are violent and sinful, and the Bible recounts them without commending them to us or recommending them as a lifestyle. So the violence of God is another thing. We might think that the Old Testament has a violent and judgmental God, while the New Testament has a loving and merciful God, but this is not the case either. For example, the words love and mercy are used far more in the Old Testament than they are used in the New Testament. For example, the words love and mercy are used far more in the Old Testament than they are used in the New Testament. So there is also an argument to be made about the severity of God's violence. The Old Testament doesn't deal much with the question of eternity, but the New Testament put God in the position of inflicting internal punishment. But the biggest problem is the divine violence that we find in Old Testament. Time after time, we find a God who wipes out an entire nation. This may offend us greatly, and we may think that this objection is insurmountable, but if we pay attention a little more closely, we notice an emerging pattern of God's actions. So, God only wipes out entire nation in situations where there is a nation engaged in grave sin that entangles all the people. God's holiness demands satisfaction and response. So, if we wonder why God killed innocent children, if we wondered, we should remember that no one is innocent, for everyone is born with sin. God is sovereign over all life. He is a loving God. He gave, He can also take away. It is wrong for humans to take a life because life is not owned by humans, but God made life and maintains possession of it. So every situation that happened in the Old Testament had a reason. It was out of His loving, loving character. That was why He did all that He did. So if we hear such argument as this, we should be able to tell people that He is a loving Father, and He has a better perspective of all. He has a better perspective of our life, and there is a reason, a loving reason, why He would allow us to go through pain at a particular time, go through suffering at a particular time, or go through any form of persecution at a particular time. So we should be joyful and we should remain trusting, knowing the Father that we serve. Thank you very much for joining us. Would appreciate if you have any question, please drop. Let us learn together, and we encourage you as well to read the book. Bye.